Hi, this is the second half of the videos on vectors. And so again, vectors are like arrays, but where you can add to or easily remove. And instead of having the palindrome like I did the first time, I am going to be using structures. And structures are a lightweight class where you have all the variables you need for a particular item all stored in one location. For example, in this case, I'll go ahead and go to the work. And then I'll go ahead and share it. And then you can see then I have in here, I'll go ahead and open up View, Solution Explorer, and go immediately to the header file because we've already explained vectors once. And so therefore, if I go to the header file, then a header file, if you remember Pragma once, and then the if not desc student allow this to be only read in once. If you notice also I have .h, and on the other one I had .hpp. They are basically interchangeable. H is the old one for C, usually HPP is for C++, but I just wanted to show that you could use either one. And the main thing is you need to include the file and then have a prototype. And then I have the various standard library includes like the string, IOString, vector, algorithm, and then windows.h for being able to define colors. And that just shows you that you can have a little bit of fun with your console so that you can change the fonts to various colors. And I have the most common ones here. Then on the struct, has to be defined in the header file. It cannot be passed through to the associated CPP file because this has to be in place before it is used. And so therefore, if I'm going to use it in a CPP file, I need to have it defined in the header file. So in this struct, then I have two strings. One is for last name, one is for first name, and an integer for grade. You can have various types of variables in here, and then student can be actually looked upon as a super variable. It just has three variables in it, and I access them by whatever the instant of student is, dot last name, dot first name, and dot grade. And if you've used, let's see, some of these, you'll notice that you can have something dot, and if it has a name and then parentheses after that, that means it's a method or function. Whereas if you don't have any parentheses after the name, then that means it is a variable or attribute. So then these, again, the backslash means an escape sequence. So this then tells the computer what color they want the fonts that follow. And then I also have used this to create a show values so that it goes through and just passes through a vector to a student and then prints out the values. Going to the main routine on the vectors, then I have in here again the descriptor area, and this just says when I modified it, and then the standard, let's see, include libraries for the standard library. And then my own include file is student structs.h, which includes the definition of the student structure. I have problems with reading an integer, and therefore I have a special routine that for reading the integer, and then I pass in instructions, and whatever the instructions are, I go ahead and then show them. And then I don't have a default for this, but that's okay. If I want to have a default, I could always put it here. And like I did in the other header file, which I showed you, then I have the return value. First thing I always do, I make sure that the variable type matches up. In this case, it's an integer. Then I have a string input to read the actual input, and then a bool loop. I set the loop to false so it will fall out of the while loop. Otherwise, then I read in a string into CN and then try to convert it to from string to integer. And that's then stored in return value, which is an integer. And if everything works well, then this has already been set to false. If everything does not work well, then it catches an error, and I'm going to put the error in red. Please type in an integer ID. And I think I'm just going to have it, please type in an integer. Then make sure it goes to a new line. And then I say true, which will then cause it to loop back and go through this process again. And if it doesn't turn to true, then it drops through, and whatever was typed in as return value for integer, that's what I return. Then I'm going to create a function to load the information for one student. And just to be fancy, I'm just doing the initial instruction in green. And I tell them to type in the student's last name. And I just make sure that something is actually typed in. Sometimes I have it so that if nothing is typed in, it'll just go on and not allow me to type something in, which will cause it to look weird because it'll have to please type in the student's last name, and then immediately after it, please type in the student's first name without giving me any chance. And this just gives me a chance to clear out anything that might be in the keyboard queue, and then just get the get line. And I expect something of some length. So if it's less than 1, I know there is a problem, and I'll go back and loop again. Then I set the last name. Notice this is what I was talking about. If you notice, then this is a student struct. So one of the items I have is redval.lastname equals and whatever the input is. Likewise, then I go ahead and type in the first name and magenta color, and then finally I go ahead and do a reset, which will make it white. And then please type in the student's class grade, give you an example of 9 to 12. And notice I then am calling readInt, which I went over before. And again, I have redval.grade. If you remember the structure, then I have 2 strings, first name and last name, and I have an integer for grade. Then I return the red val, which is a student. So now I have filled up the 3 fields of the student. And in the main one I have here, I have to set get standard handle, standard output handle. So then this is then setting it up so I can go ahead and set everything to proper color and also set a font index. And then I can set font size to different things. Like if I consider these two too small, I might just go ahead and up this by a couple points. And then this one by a couple points also. Make it a little bit more readable. Then I'm going to set the console fonts. And outcon is the handle. And then font, if you notice, I loaded up these two into the font, and then I'm just going to go ahead and then pass it by reference. Set up the vectors for the student. Okay, here is the student vector. Notice it is students. Our student is the structure with the last name, first name, and grade. And then I'm going to put it into a variable called students, which I can treat in most cases just like an array. Then I have string input for inputting information. And then I set the student file name to student.txt. And then set the index to 0. Then set up the input and output stream. And I see if there is a file. So I try to open the student file. If it is there, then I'll get a positive true value for this. If it's not, then I'll skip this and go down to else. And I set up student. Then I'm just going to use an S, which is perfectly valid, and read all the fields. Then I'm going to go ahead and if this is, notice I am reading the 3 fields from the file. Then if they do exist, then these are loaded up into the student vector or student structure S. And then I am loading it into, reading it from the input file. And then I push it onto the stack so it will be on the stack. Then I close the input file. And then I open the output file, and the ios_base::app means that it is a file that I'm going to append to. Now, if no file was found, this would come up false. And notice then I am just going ahead and output file.open, and I'm just opening it up straight away because if there's no file, I don't have to worry about appending anything. And this will start a new file. Then I set to white, do you want to add students? I give the person yes, no. And clear off any excess. Then to upper. And check for capital Y. And if there is capital Y, that means I want to enter a student. So just tells me the instructions. And then I go add student, which will return a student record. And then I push back the student record that was entered. And I then put it in the vector structure. And I also add it to the file. so that I can slowly build up a long file. And you have, if you are in D2L, then you should have access to one of these copies of the file. And then I do a while loop so that after I've gone through and read everything, then if it asks me to go ahead and do this, then I go through and I don't do an else, and so the loop is true. And then I go back up. If it's false, then I just drop out, and then I close the file that I have been outputting to. Finally, I do a student list, and then I say press enter to exit. And in this case, I found that cn.clear was not clearing out the excess characters I might have. And so I did a cn.ignore, which then is a little bit harder cleaning out of any information there. So it ignores whatever's in the queue, which finally gets this particular part to work. And I do a get line cn for input, and then I put it into input. And I don't care what it is because I'm just going to return 0. So that's it for the main program. Again, going back to solution editor and structure. And I do have I do include the student structs. So I have it here also because I need it here. And then in here, then I am saying that this is for swapping two students, and I need which two students I'm going to swap based on index and also the vector passed in by reference. And the reason why I do it by reference is when I reverse two of these elements, I want it to permanently be changed. So everything's in alphabetical order. And I just include what's in the header file. I don't need to do this, but I just did it for my own information purposes. And then this is the information about the next routine, which was mentioned in the header file. And the input is a vector students with the name of students. And the output prints the list of the students, but I don't really have any physical output because there's a void. And then I'm going to do a bubble sort. Bubble sort is simply where you start off at the beginning and then start comparing two numbers at a time until you have reached the end of the elements you want to search, and you always move the largest one to the right until it is done. Then the second line will take care of moving it to the right. Then we come back and we want to do it then the size of the vector students, always -1 because it starts at 0 instead of 1. I'm just going to go through that one at a time, but then if you notice, J always starts at 0 and then always goes to the size of the vector, -1 for getting rid of the extra one we don't want, and then -I, which will be incremented so that I don't go all the way to the end again, because if I've already had something already sorted out to the very end, I don't need to try to resort it again. And always show the colors. And then this first one is sorting the first name, so that you'll notice everything else when you see the program, everything else looks the same. Well, they're always moved the records together, which is to be expected. But the only one I'm alphabetizing to begin with is the first name. Then I go through and alphabetize the second name, and then I get the color green. I get the grade in order. So it now goes 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. That is the program. And then we have the debugging started down here. And I can show you what colors do. So if you notice, I do say yes, last name, and first name. And we'll put them in 10th grade. Then it'll come back and ask me if I want another one. And if I say no, then it will print out all the students I've entered in there over time. First of all, with the first name sorted. And you'll notice all the first names are in nice, neat order, but the second names are not. Then when I sort the second names, then turns out the first names are in order and the second names are in order. And then finally, if you notice, the grades are all mixed up, but the names are in order. Then here you'll notice that all the 9th graders are in alphabetical order, all the 10th graders are in alphabetical order, all the 11th graders, and all the seniors are all in alphabetical order. Then I'm down to the press enter for exit. And that's the program. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me go ahead and bring up and stop sharing and stop recording.